comes back especially to kill his father just outside Rochester.
And there's also sort of connections between voice and place. So we were talking just a moment ago about Cannon Street Road in Whitechapel, which is a street that is the old spine of the East End that runs from kind of Wapping up to Bethnal Green Road and on to Hackney. And this is a street. I wrote a novel called Foxy Tea, which is set in Cannon Street Road at the turn of the century. And rather than exploring any kind of anything any historical material, I was looking at the top layer of the strata in this area that's been defined by migration, looking at what's happening on the absolute surface. And the most striking thing about Cannon Street Road at that time, the most striking economy that was evolving was the development of what has become known as multicultural London English. This kind of hybrid language which borrows from Black British language and Cockney, and was kind of evolving before my eyes really, and before my ears. And in writing a novel about Whitechapel set at that time, turn of the century, it was impossible not to write in what became known as multicultural London English. But earlier, we were saying how 20 years before, 30 years before, other kinds of economies were kind of operating in Cannon Street Road. Other writers, kind of cocaine smuggling,
Well, what it was there was a house,
door to door.
a particular house in Cannon Street Road, where survivors from 60s counterculture, rock and roll had hidden away, almost like in performance. And one of these guys had become a major book dealer, which is to say that he was dealing with the culture and rescuing re-forgotten writers. And it could have been David Seabrook, but it was often Edwardian and Victorian writers that he was rescuing from the streets, bringing into this house. And then people were coming from all over London into this strange sort of ruined house to collect these books. But at the same time, that particular culture was being underwritten by cocaine dealing. So that some of them were, one particular cocaine dealer collected the novels of Somerset and Ross. Somerville and Ross, sort of Anglo-Irish hunting novels, which he would collect first editions of and exchange it for cocaine. So there was a really weird economy going on there. But that was also very much what London was about, that riverside reaches of London, because you had all the stuff that had come in as legitimate cargoes in Wapping for so long. And just 50 yards to the south there's Crossroads, where on the Crossroads by the pub that's right there by the St George's and the East Church is where the Ratcliffe Highway murderer, written about by De Quincey in Murder Considered as One of the Fine Arts, was buried at the Crossroads with a stake through his heart and his head cut off, which turned up in the pub. And that is within yards of where you're describing those activities, which people who know none of that history, but have an equally interesting language that is imported, that's come in, as it were, on the river, and mixes with all of the other sounds and things of London to create a new form of language. And it's fascinating that all that happens within tiny, tiny geography, in the same way. The bus shelter, Dreamland, Lindsay Anderson comes down to Dreamland when they're making free cinema, the idea of cinema being invented, that's just on the same spot.
And Lindsay Anderson's amanuensis, Tunde Ikoli, the playwright, grew up on Cannon Street Road and got his first taste of filmmaking, making the first access television program for the BBC called Open Door in 1973. This 16-year-old kid, Tunde Ikoli, his social worker knew someone at the BBC and said Tunde would make a good program, so they gave them BBC studios for the night, and with a bit of help from Marty Feldman and Johnny Spate, they made some amazing programs. This you can kind of counterpoint with another TV program from the same year, which was in the documentary stand, Man Alive, which took three kids from the same class in school as Tunde, but said these children are already blighted by crime, they're destined to be criminals, and they put them through a number of fictionalized documentary scenes where they would be breaking windows or something. And these kids didn't go on to make an open access TV program or a feature film as Tunde Akoli did, but they spent the whole of the rest of their lives trying to live down that stigmatization of the man alive document.
I think Simon's got a copy of The Wasteland with more footnotes than T.S. Eliot. So.
Yeah, well they were, they're too embarrassing. They're from when I was about 19. So we won't go onto those, but I was going to bring something in here about, or brings back to The Wasteland a little bit, which is that David Seabrook, in his opening to All Devils Are Here, talks about this section around Margate, on Margate Sands. So that's that section. There's the bit that doesn't usually gather that much attention is the last two lines of that part of the poem, where it goes, "My people, humble people, who expect nothing." And what David points out, which is really sort of, I think is really important, is that Eliot was here about 5 days before the very first Cenotaph Remembrance Day. And so these words could be the words of the king of that time, which kind of brings us back to Tony White's Holden Cenotaph. And I suppose the question I would have is, how does Eliot really set the agenda for how you use kind of factual information in works of art? Where does one thing, where do the facts stop, if you like, and where does the story start? Iain?
That sounds like the point to finish.
Is it the point to finish?
I don't know. It feels like it's good.
It's a rhetorical question to sort of put out.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I forgot what it was. What is it?
The rhetorical question is where does the fact end?
There is
fiction
no. Well, I
starts?
don't think there's any such thing as a fact.
Right.
Or a fiction. I mean, a fact is one person's lie that's been repeated enough to be accepted.
Okay.
That's a good one.
What happens is, historically, what we're doing here is we are mythologizing around certain characters and certain landscapes and places. The people who are really involved in keeping those places going like a machine basically don't have time to do that, because they're implicated in it in a different way. You have this slightly damaged category of people who come in the way that we do now, because I think where we are now is a kind of off-highway culture. It's like a service station culture. Yesterday, in fact, was it yesterday? It seems longer. I was in Brunel, right by Uxbridge, just come off the road there, and there's Tony White doing his thing. He's there. And there's Will Self over there, and yesterday he was in Bristol, and so was I. And so you realise that between Bristol and Margate is this string of people sort of jumping off the car, out of the train, and finessing this material that goes on, and to a degree honouring the places they are, but with the danger of these becoming non-places, because passing through Canterbury University this morning and having a cup of coffee, the colour codings of the cafe were exactly like you would have got if you were in a hospital waiting room or an airport. So there's this kind of generic entity. You could be anywhere and everywhere. So that's why it's important to hit on facts, myths, details of place, to make individual places, locality, to have an importance in the grand corporate scheme of things where everywhere's the same.
And the question is then, where are we going to meet tomorrow?
Bath? Are you coming to Bath? Okay. Well, I'll see you in Mexico.
I think that's a good point to finish.
Yeah, I think we should do that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.